know the why human trafficking work is needed, to fight for the freedom of modern-day slaves. But love, passion, commitment isn't all you need to be an effective and successful anti-trafficking advocate. Learn the how. I'm Dr. Celia Williamson, Director of the Human Trafficking and Social Justice Institute at the University of Toledo. Welcome to the Emancipation Nation podcast, where I'll provide you with the latest and best methods, policy, and practice discussed by experienced experts in the field so that you can cut through the noise, save time, and be about the work of saving lives.
Welcome to the Emancipation Nation podcast, and this week we have Christy Croft on. Christy became a prevention education program manager for the North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault after serving as the coalition's anti-trafficking specialist. We're happy to have you here today, Christy. I know the topics we're going to talk about today are going to be of great interest to the audience, so thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so Christy, we want to talk about prevention going on in North Carolina. We want to talk about how we best serve LGBTQ youth. We want to talk about what we should be doing with these high trauma clients. So you recently got a new job.
Yeah, so NCCASA is the North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and so every state has a statewide coalition that focuses on addressing the needs of survivors and also doing prevention work in the state. And in our state, the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Coalitions are separate agencies. And I work for the one that does sexual assault work. And so we are the primary training and technical assistance providers for all of North Carolina's rape crisis centers, many of whom are dual domestic violence agencies. Some of them have human trafficking programs. Some of them also have child advocacy centers. So we provide training and support for all of the rape crisis centers. As an agency, all of our positions, all of our work we do from a strong social justice, anti-oppression lens. We have a agency philosophy that if we focus on the margins, that everyone, even those in the center, gets served with stronger, better, more sensitized services. For my role doing prevention education program manager, I oversee the state's efforts around sexual violence prevention, and obviously sex trafficking is a form of sexual violence, and there is also sexual violence that occurs as part of the force or coercion with labor trafficking. So we do a lot of work both with survivors of human trafficking on the ground and with other state groups like the North Carolina Coalition Against Human Trafficking and our North Carolina Human Trafficking Commission. My prevention work is with those mostly with those rape crisis centers and nonprofits in our state who receive a specific grant from the CDC called the Rape Prevention Education Grant, and it's CDC's RPE grant. And so agencies can apply, show how they want to do prevention work in their community and receive funding to do that. And most of those rape crisis centers are doing work in middle and high schools or with adolescents around prevention of sexual violence, countering harmful gender norms, building community support and connection, and helping these kids have access to caring adults and connection to their schools, which are all things that research has shown are protective factors around sexual violence. That doing these things is demonstrated to reduce sexual violence. So they use evidence-based and evidence-informed curricula. Sometimes it's modified based on community needs assessments. And a lot of them are doing work with even younger kids in elementary and primary schools. Some are doing work in their community with adults around bar outreach or barbershop outreach programs or general community awareness and outreach programs.
I think that's so cool that you're also in barbershops. But let me back up a little bit because you said they do evidence-based and evidence-informed. And, you know, a lot of us out there that are practitioners, we just go and do sometimes what we think is needed and what we think is best. But why should we be focused on finding evidence-based programs? And what's the difference between an evidence-based program and an evidence-informed program?
Right. So evidence-informed just speaking casually, feels to me a little bit like evidence-based light. Like we are at the point where we've created the program. We've created a program out of the best evidence that we have available. We've started implementing it. It looks like we're having effective results, but we haven't completed the evaluation and research that would prove that it's evidence-based. So evidence-informed frequently means that a program is on its way to becoming evidence-based. And the reason it's so important to look at these evidence-based curricula is because there's a lot of reasons. One is we don't want to be doing things that don't work. Resources are limited. Grant funding is limited. Our time, our human power is limited. We don't want to waste our time and capacity on things that aren't going to have the maximum impact. And so there's evidence out there that shows us things that we know reduce sexual violence and empower things like bodily autonomy and countering effects of childhood trauma. We know that there's things out there. Why reinvent the wheel? There's so many wonderful evidence-based programs to prevent sexual violence that are out there that could, with very minimal modifications, include additional information around human trafficking. Sometimes when I hear other people in the trafficking movement say we don't really have any best practices, we don't have any evidence-based practices, it feels like they're ignoring this wealth of information that's there to be gleaned from the sexual violence and domestic violence movements, which have done so much with the CDC around prevention and what interventions work. You know, there's information out there. We just might need to modify it somewhat to be appropriate for trafficking.
Yes, I feel I'm 100% with you. I feel like what you just said was, I just went to church and I just heard the best sermon that I could hear because, you know, I teach a class and students have to write a paper about a program and they would prefer just to make it up and think that, well, you know, I'm helping, at least I'm doing something. And that grates on my nerves because I don't want people to do something. I want people to do the best thing, because I think when you go to the doctor, you want the doctor, if your knee hurts, you don't want the doctor checking your elbow. You want the doctor to be using evidence-based research, and to come up with something that helps you based on what worked in the past for other people. And I think people that have been victimized through trafficking, through sexual assault, they deserve the best, not just something.
Yeah, I was going to say one of my favorite resources out there, there's a series of documents by the CDC, and one of them that I found just really eye-opening, it just transformed how I look at prevention, is a CDC document called Connecting the Dots. And I wish everybody working in human trafficking would look at this as they think about prevention and how they want to approach prevention, because Connecting the Dots is the CDC's one of their main documents on violence prevention. And what they found is this idea of shared risk and protective factors, which means that there are certain risk factors that increase the likelihood of someone experiencing or perpetrating violence, and there's protective factors that either reduce the chance of them experiencing or perpetrating or make their resilience a little more, help set them up for better recovery if they do experience it. And they found that many of these risk and protective factors are the same according to the research across, I think, 8 different forms of violence that include sexual violence, domestic violence, teen dating violence, child maltreatment, elder abuse, suicide. These same risk and protective factors apply across multiple forms of violence. And so if we get out of our silos of thinking, I'm only working on this one issue, and look at our multidisciplinary efforts at addressing these risk and protective factors, we can strengthen services and build prevention programming for so many forms of violence at once and share resources in the process, share that resources and human power and capacity with other community agencies.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that years ago, I know Hawkins and Catalano in Washington State did 30 years of research and put it together and found out, people that were doing these prevention programs with youth were actually preventing delinquency, pregnancy, school dropout. It might have been a pregnancy prevention program, but then when you went in, they discovered, they're actually preventing things across many domains. So I think we need to, exactly what you're saying, we need to work smarter, not harder, because we are a brother's keeper and our sister's keeper. Our tax dollars are going to help, and they should be. But we, in turn, should use that money responsibly by using these evidence-based and evidence-informed programs. I mean, I think that's a lot easier and a lot better. It's working smarter. So what about you? I know that you're involved in this Teach to Reach program, and what is that exactly?
So Teach to Reach, I'm just one member of the team. I'm definitely not the one leading it. They're amazing. It is a project out of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill School of Social Work. And a few years ago, North Carolina passed legislation mandating teaching sex trafficking prevention in schools. And what happened is we started grabbing at these programs that seemed to be either evidence-based or evidence-informed. Some districts might not even have that much, but those that were looking for evidence-based found that sometimes it doesn't fit very well into what's already happening in North Carolina around health education. So Teach to Reach looked at the 7th, 8th, and 9th grade health standards that are standard across the state to find which of those standards address healthy relationships and sexual violence prevention, dating violence prevention, and we pulled out those standards and then crafted a 4-session curricula around those standards so that it will dovetail with what teachers are already doing in those grades as part of the health curriculum. And so we're at the place now where we're starting to roll it out and give it some test runs in different schools. We are also revising it to create a second curriculum that's a modified one for alternative schools. So it would be modified to be appropriate for use in places like juvenile justice facilities or group homes or places where children who we know already have a whole lot more of those risk factors and lower access to some of those protective factors are in schools so that it can address their specific needs.
Yes, and when you're talking about risk and protective factors, that is a theory, and I know people hate to hear about theory, but this is such a cool and relevant theory. It's basically what you're doing is, the goal is to reduce risk and those risk factors and to increase protection in those protective factors. I mean, it's a very simple concept that you go in with as you're looking for these evidence-based models. A lot of times that is the thinking behind them. So is this Teach to Reach program, is that available to anybody outside of North Carolina or no?
I think as we roll it out, it will be. And I know that they do have a website. I forget what the website is, but you can find it by searching Teach number 2. So the 2 in the middle is the number, Teach to Reach, and UNC will get you to their page. And I know that they do plan to roll it out, and it will become more widely available. It's a really solid curriculum. It's gender inclusive, so it's good for students of any gender. And it's 4 sessions. They're brief sessions. It comes with an educator guide that makes it very easy to implement. And we're currently working on the training for the teachers who'd be implementing it. So it will, once it's out there, be a really wonderful package that'll be easy to implement.
Well, kudos to University of North Carolina School of Social Work. Now, I also know, Christy, that you have focused some of your work on LGBTQ youth populations. And what can you enlighten us about how to best work with those populations in terms of trafficking?
Sure. So what drew my attention to that when I first started really digging into my trafficking work was when you look at the definition of minor sex trafficking, it doesn't require a third-party exploiter. Any sex trade by someone under the age of 18 is trafficking. But what I was hearing from some of my work around LGBTQ youth homelessness that I also do, what I was hearing from a lot of them is that many of the people I was in contact with who were LGBTQ were engaged in the sex trade as minors, and some of them had third-party exploiters, but many did not. And when I started hearing stories where someone's entry into sex work was either self-initiated. They were homeless and a teenager and on the street and trying to get their needs met, and knew without anyone even offering that that's something they could do to try to feed themselves. Or when I heard stories of someone saying, I was homeless as a teenager and I was living in I forget what they call them, I was living in a trap house basically with other homeless teenagers who said, this isn't great, but this is how I'm surviving. I can give you someone's name if that helps, where they're not even having a third-party exploiter, because the exploitation didn't begin with a third party. The exploitation began with the anti-LGBTQ sentiment that led that kid to not have a supportive family and to be out on the streets. And
Yes.
it really drew my attention to the ways that trafficking sometimes happens a little differently among LGBTQ youth because of their specific vulnerabilities. And that means we need to change the way we think about prevention, to where prevention becomes addressing why doesn't this kid, this teenager, have a safe home? Who are their connected adults? Where can we house them? I did a presentation on LGBTQ youth and trafficking at the Carolina Conference on Queer Youth last year. And it was an interesting training because half the kids in the room, half the attendees in the room were professionals and half were teenagers and adolescents. And I did sort of a very depressing choose your own adventure with them, where we picked a character who that time turned out to be a trans girl of color. And we started out at home, and the beginning of the activity said, your parents finally challenge you and tell you they've heard that you are not conforming to the gender in the way they expected. And you come out to them as both trans and queer, and your mother cries, your dad leaves the room and gets angry, and for a week neither of them talk to you except to tell you when food is ready. And then I stopped to give them the option, do you stay home or do we leave? And what blew my mind is that while most of the adults said they would stay because it hadn't escalated into violence yet, almost every young person in that room said that would be enough to make them leave. Having that sense of shame and disappointment and silent treatment from a parent would be enough to make them feel like they couldn't stay there anymore.
Wow.
And that really broke my heart, to think of how deeply our actions as parents, and I'm a parent myself, to think of how deeply the way we treat our children and the tone they receive and the ways we fail to support them sometimes could cause almost every child in that room to say they would want to leave home. What are we doing for those kids? If we want to do prevention, we really need to be pulling back even broader and thinking, why doesn't this kid have a safe home? 30% of LGBTQ youth report experiencing violence from their family when they come out. Mm-hmm. And 40% of homeless youth identify as queer, and 46% of those who do said they ran away because of family rejection. Mm-hmm. So what are we doing? They end up in foster care, and there's no guarantee that their foster family will be any more accepting of their identity sometimes. So how do we fix those structures so that that teenager is never on the street having to make that choice of how they're going to feed themselves? A teenager should not have to make a choice about how they can eat.
And I think in our community, or in Ohio anyway, LGBTQ youth that do leave home are 2.5 times more likely to be trafficked, because exactly the scenario, getting involved in survival sex or getting exploited in exchange for a place to stay, food, money, items, and then being introduced, therefore, to traffickers and other people like that.
Right.
But even all the traumas that came before the trafficking experience, the family situation, running away, having no place to go, no support system, all those things are traumatizing.
Absolutely. And that's something where we think about this, that even when they have, get removed from the home, there's studies that show that LGBTQ foster youth are 2 times more likely to live in a group placement rather than with a family. and that trans foster youth have 2 times more placements on average than lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth, and that then means that some of that vulnerability follows them into young adulthood because, I mean, I think about myself at 19 and 20, and I lived 2 states away from my family, but I would drive twice a month up to South Carolina from Florida with a trunk load of laundry to do at my dad's house, and I had someone I could call if I needed help.
Exactly.
And if you've been bounced around from one home to another in a group home and you don't have anyone who's really like family, and all of a sudden you're out of the foster care system, those transitional services for foster youth, that 18 to 24-year-old age, are so essential, so essential.
Yes, I couldn't imagine 18 or 19 years old. I couldn't do anything. I had to have a lot of support from my parents. I lived in one of their apartments for free. I mean, I had to have a lot of support from them. So I couldn't imagine. Do you know why? Do you have a good idea why LGBTQ youth are more likely to go into group homes and why trans youth have more placements?
Well, I think part of that just gets into how sensitized the services we have are, whether or not there are families. If you have an area where you have a lot of very, very loving families who want to support foster youth but maybe don't agree with someone being LGBTQ or feel like that's something that's wrong about that youth, or maybe they want to do well but they don't know how and haven't received adequate training and support, it's a little bit harder. Just thinking of examples and things I've seen happen in our state, sometimes we end up with trans youth who are not at home and end up being trafficked, and they can't find a shelter to go to. There are already systems involved. They've been through foster homes. They can't find a shelter to go to. We end up finding them somewhere to stay briefly, and then I end up hearing later that they left a shelter because they were getting misgendered, and at least their trafficker got their gender and name right. And that breaks my heart again, that we have situations where trans youth, whether they're minors or young adults or trans people of any age, are choosing to return to the streets or to their trafficker because the shelters are making them feel so rejected and shamed around their identity or orientation. So I think it's just a lack of sensitized services, and then also a lack of shelter for minors in the first place.
Yeah, and I think some people confuse, the idea of feeling guilt and feeling shame. People that aren't sensitized, they get guilt and shame mixed up because they think people feel guilty or because of something they've done. And that's very different than shame. Shame is what you feel when you feel you are something wrong. Guilt is what you should feel. If you go out and do something wrong, you should feel guilty about it. That's a part of the human psyche. But feeling shame that's something you feel when you feel you are something wrong. And that's a whole nother level. And how do you remove that type of shame? What should we be doing as advocates to address this issue about LGBTQ youth?
Well, that's something where part of the reason that they're feeling that shame instead of guilt is because they're being told that their identity is wrong, that who they are is wrong and flawed and broken. That's the message they're receiving from a lot of the messages they get when they do seek services. And so one of the things that I would recommend anybody who wants to do trafficking work that is inclusive do is reach out to local trainers who know what they're doing around LGBTQ issues. Most states have a state equality nonprofit. In ours, it's Equality North Carolina. A lot of communities have LGBTQ centers in their communities. There's also a wonderful nonprofit called Point Source Youth. And Point Source Youth partners with local nonprofits to establish host home programs largely for LGBTQ youth, host home programs, rapid rehousing, and family strengthening programs. And they've partnered with 2 nonprofits in North Carolina to where we have host home programs that are going in both Durham and Charlotte. But reach out for training to learn how you can do better. And also I want to just point out for people listening, I do those trainings sometimes here in our state, and I have been incredibly heartwarmed by the number of faith-based agencies that have reached out to me for LGBTQ specific training around how to serve survivors who maybe they don't feel as equipped to serve them on their own and need that extra support. So reach out for that support. I've done some support and training with Legacy of Hope International at one of their conferences they did, and I know that our Salvation Army here in North Carolina has Project Fight as their anti-trafficking initiative. And I'm at the point where I have many of their case managers' phone numbers in my cell phone because they reach out and text me when they have a trans survivor and are trying to find how to support them. So we do tend to think that a lot of the agencies that are not doing well by LGBTQ youth are faith-based. There's a lot of faith-based ones who are reaching out and really want to do good because they want to end trafficking. They want to help survivors.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think LGBTQ youth have nothing to feel guilty about, nothing to feel shameful about, and at the very least, do no harm. But at the best, go out and get yourself trained. There's no shame in that game. Go and learn what you should be doing so that you can provide the best service. I think for all the people that need, all the vulnerable people that need services. So do you ever do anything online to do training for people across states that are interested?
I have not yet, but I am sure that there's stuff out there. I know specific to trans issues, which I know tend to be the ones where people struggle the most. There's a nonprofit called Forge that provides training and webinars around serving trans survivors of violence and changing your agency's protocols and ways of doing things to be more sensitized to serving trans survivors. And Forge has a lot of recorded webinars on their website that address LGBTQ issues broadly, but specifically trans issues as well.
That was the first half of the interview with Christy Croft. And it reminds me that a smooth sea never made a skilled sailor. Christy has managed and survived rough waters. Just like you. You have to recall how you weathered your storm. It made you a stronger person. Those experiences you had, those issues, those problems, that trauma, those are the things that you're going to recall. Those are the things you're going to use to be the best advocate you can be. And then Christy gives you excellent resources, connecting the dots, Teach to Reach, Point Source Youth, Forge. These are tools to put in your toolbox. And the way that you advocate will be like no one else. Because you are like no one else. You're unique. And your experiences connected with the tools and the skills and the knowledge will make you a great advocate, unlike any other. If you like this episode of Emancipation Nation, please subscribe and I'll send you the weekly podcast. Until then, the fight continues.